Your Grace, Reverend Fathers, Mrs. Miller, and ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. I'm very happy to be here. In fact, at my age, I'm glad to be anywhere. My next birthday will be 87. There are many advantages to getting old. I can't think of any right now, but there must be some. As has been pointed out, we're here for something special in terms of praying for the soul of a great football man and remembering a man who is a great human being. He was a great coach, as has been pointed out. And you know, in thinking about this evening and this particular program, I realized that this past weekend, Weston Dressler was inducted into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. And I immediately remembered that in talking about Coach Miller, Weston said, "We would have run through a brick wall for that guy." I also remember another saying by a person who said, when I was introduced to him and extended my hand for a handshake, you could almost feel his kindness. One other thing that relates to the Millers, when they were leaving here, and I understand at times since, they have said that they were better for having lived and worked here. I thought it was the other way around. I thought we were better because they were here with us. We're going to ask for a few reminiscences. There, we got that out. And to do it, I'm going to call on our first speaker, a man who's applied more bandages, slings, and crutches, Ivan Gutfriend. Ivan, where are you? There he is.
Thanks, Lauren. Haven't seen you for a while. Appreciate seeing you again. While I was doing my little duties today around the house, my wife said she was going to pick up a card, a sympathy card for Maureen. And so, anyways, when she brought it back, I says, "Oh my goodness." I says, "I have to read this because it just fits. It's just perfect." So if you don't mind, I'm going to read that before I give you a few little anecdotes. There are certain people who touch the lives of those they know in a unique way. Knowing them brings us joy and inspiration, and when they're gone, memories of all they've done stay with us. And so I thought about Ken immediately when I saw that card. I thought it was so apropos. Just a couple words with regards to my inauguration with Ken Miller. I remember when Kent Austin got the head coaching job. I remember he coming back into my office because, he played here and I knew him for a long period of time. He said that he had hired Ken Miller as his first assistant coach. And I said to myself, "Who's Ken Miller?" I thought I knew a lot of the assistant coaches, but I didn't know Ken. And then when he left, Eric Tillman came by and he said that he already had a coach picked out since Kent had left. And I said to myself, "I wonder who this is going to be." And he said it was Ken Miller. Well, I didn't have to guess who he was, that's for sure. But it was a great choice. It was a perfect choice. He was the type of person that had the right temperament, and he's the type of person that loved his players. He respected the players, and and he had a maturity that he brought to them. One of the things that I remember, one of the first things that happened in the first game of the season, usually we have a coach that gives a pregame speech. And so anyways, I remember when Ken Miller all of a sudden came out of the came out of the coach's room. He all of a sudden stopped in his tracks, did not say a word for 5 or 6 minutes. There's about 75 players looking to see what kinds of words of wisdom he had to give them. And I think he was stunned for about 5 seconds. Nothing was said. And then he just said, "Let's go, guys, let's go get him." And so I thought Ken was kind of shocked when he saw all 75 guys. You could hear a pin drop, and nothing was said. One of the things that I noticed early on when he had officially named Darian Durant his starting quarterback, it was one of the early games of the year, and I remember Darian. I don't know why I was close by to Coach Miller, and anyways, he had said that or Darian came off the field. He looked frustrated. I thought he was injured or something because he was looking right at Coach Miller, and he didn't look like he was having a hard time out there. And the first thing I noticed is that Coach Miller came up to him, put his arm around him, calmed him down, and after that, things, as you know from the last 2 or 3 years that Ken was there, we were fairly successful, and Darian was one of the main leaders of that group. So Coach Miller had a way of just making players feel comfortable, making them feel like they knew what they were doing, and and he made everybody feel like part of the team. One of the things that I really enjoyed, usually at the end of a game, was the post-game medical meetings we used to have. This is where we sit down with the head coach, explain all the injuries, players that are going to miss the next game, players that are coming off the injured list that are ready to go, players that may or may not need an extra day of rest before they play. But before we always get started, I don't know who set this rule up, but thank God Gordy was there. We always had beer after a game, and beer was eliminated from the locker room that year, and I don't know why, but we always had beer in the back, and Coach Miller used to always come by and says, "Have you got a Pilsner?" Not just any beer, but have you got a Pilsner? So he always enjoyed his Pilsner and sat down. We discussed what was going to happen, and he was thankful for that. One of the things or the first person I thought of when I was asked to be in the plaza, it didn't take long for me to decide that or think that Ken Miller was the guy that was going to induct me. And so I was hoping that the organization would bring him back. I knew they would, but I was just hoping that they would confer with that, because he was a person that really affected me. I've gone through a lot of head coaches, 38 of them. So anyways, but I liked them all. Don't get me wrong, I liked them all, but Ken was special. He really made you feel like that you were important or part of the team, and I really thanked him for that. Just one other note, I have to say that in 2010, after we lost the Grey Cup in Edmonton, Ken was having a double knee replacement. And so anyways, that was early December. And anyways, we dealt with that situation. It wasn't easy going, but we dealt with that situation. And all the thing I can remember is either late that spring, just before training camp, or shortly after training camp, Ken had mentioned to me, if I had known my knees felt this good. And he left it at that. I'm assuming he probably would have stayed on as a coach. And it's too bad, because, he felt the best that he'd ever been for a long time. He could cross his legs, do a figure of 4 without any pain or any problems. But he just left me hanging there, but I think I knew what he meant. And it's sad, and it's too bad that he didn't stay on as a coach, because he was a great person and a great man. One last thing, I'll just say this: Ken was a special person, and I really enjoyed Ken, and I'm grateful to having known him as a person, and I loved having him as a coach. Thank you. Thanks, Norm.
Next up, a player who played with great distinction, was a fan favorite, and we're delighted that he's with us this evening, Mike McCullough.
Fan favorite, eh? Thank you. I had all this nice stuff to say about Coach, but I mean, if Ivan likes you, that's big, because Ivan doesn't like anybody. So I'm done. It's an honor to be up here and talk about a great man like Coach. And I don't call him Ken, because calling him Ken is weird. It's like calling my grandfather Ed. I can't do it. It's Coach. He'll always be Coach. For years afterwards, I don't know how many times he'd look at me and go, Michael, you can call me Ken. I'm like, Coach, I can't do it. Never going to happen. There's so many things you could say about him. There's three things he valued the most. I think faith, family, and football. Those are three of the main ones, pretty much the three top ones. But he never put football, as important as it was to many of us in this room, in this province, he never put that above the other two. He didn't expect his players to do that. He didn't expect his coaches to do that. He knew it was just a game. He loved the game, but it was never more important than those other two things. And he surrounded himself with players who felt that way. He surrounded himself with coaches who felt that way. He believed in us. He genuinely cared about us, and he genuinely liked us, and we felt the same way back. Not many coaches, I think you feel that way about. There's a lot of respected coaches, but it doesn't mean you necessarily like the coach. And people who have played understand what I'm saying. Other people might think that's weird. But you can respect a coach, but not necessarily like him. We respected him, and we loved him. We really, truly did. And he gave it right back to us. I know not many people know this, but in 2009, right after camp broke, we had a new defensive coordinator, Gary Echeverry. We called the mad scientist. I see J.O. kind of smirking. Echeverry is a different dude. And Ken sees the best in everybody. And he brought Echeverry there, and he was there in 2008, and then he took over for Richie Hall in 2009. And once camp broke, there was about 8 or 9 of us veterans who went to Coach Miller and were like, this dude's crazy. Like, this isn't going to work. Everything he taught was counterintuitive to what we learned from age 5 on. He had no playbook. No playbook. Everybody has a playbook. I coached 6-year-olds in flag and have a playbook. We're in the pros, and he had no playbook. So we were just, all of us veterans went in and we were kind of like griping to Coach and saying, like, this isn't going to work, Coach. Like, this guy's lost his mind. Coach listened to us, and we had a bunch of us kind of just aired our grievances. It was pretty much a mutiny almost on our defensive coordinator. I'm not proud of it. None of us, I think, were after the fact, but he just sat there, listened. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he just said, gentlemen, there's always gentlemen, men, or riders. Gentlemen, just believe. Give it a little time. Trust me. It'll be fine. And we all just kind of look around like, okay. So we left, and a week and a half later, we went into BC, the first game of the season, won, and had 9 sacks. And I believe I think we're the top defense in the league that year, and nothing was ever said about it. Coach never had that I told you so look. He never reamed us out. He never came back at us. He just let it be, because he knew if he believed, we would eventually believe. And that's why we loved him. You know, he was a good man in a sport that sometimes doesn't produce the best people at times. You know, he just really was. He was pure. And I know Lauren mentioned Dressler. I know those guys. I saw them this past weekend at Dressler's Hall of Fame, and they were dying to be here. Begg, Dressler, Fantus, Conji, all those guys were just wanting to extend their condolences to Mrs. Miller as well. And Dressler told the story, I don't know if anybody saw it at the Hall of Fame dinner, about how his first year as a rookie, Coach pulls him out of the meetings and tells him he has something he has to have him do. Of course, Dressler is like, yeah, sure, of course. Whatever you need, Coach. I need you to take my wife to the Elton John concert tonight. And he told us this story for many years. I didn't believe him. I'm like, stop, Dress, come on, man. And he told it, and I'm like, oh my God. So Mrs. Miller went to the Elton John concert, and they had a wonderful time. But that was Coach Miller. He was just a different guy, and we loved him so much. And he's so missed. And one last thing, I know, I think it was 2008 or 2009 possibly, and we were in Toronto, I believe. I think it was 2008, because he was his first year as the head coach, and something happened on the field as the offense was out. I can't remember what happened, but you know, it didn't seem like it was a turnover, something bad against us, and all of a sudden Chris Zark, our fullback at the time, is behind him yelling, throw the flag, like he's just yelling at Coach, and Coach looks back, reaches in his pocket, and throws the flag. Zark's like, yeah, we're like, yeah, because I was behind Zark. About 5 or 6 seconds goes by, and he looks back, he goes, what are we throwing the flag for? And we all just start laughing. He even had a smirk on his face. Like, how many coaches in the pro ranks, A, have a sense of humor, and B, have a sense of humor during a game. You know, that was Coach Miller. He was one of the guys, and he was one of the best. And there's very few coaches I think he was with us for 5 years, you know, within the organization. Not once did he ever use profanity. Not once. Most coaches, like when you win, are swearing. This guy, the most he ever said was darn a couple of times when he was really heated. I think we lost by 45 points to Winnipeg, and I think he said darn 3 times. And that was Coach Miller. Like, he was just a pure good man and a good soul. And he always had sayings, and he brought, you know, not many coaches could make cool, poetry and Greek mythology into their pregame talks, but he somehow did it. I mean, every time I hear Sisyphus, I think of him all the time. It's crazy. We had the shirts with, and I said this before, but he had the shirts with the Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. We had those shirts. I think for half a season, nobody knew, but I still know how to spell Sisyphus. Most of us didn't know what it was for the first half of the year, or what it meant. And then we were like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. But he somehow made it cool. But he was just an unbelievable guy. And the things he taught us, I think, you know, even today, coaching kids that I coach, I take some of his lessons to heart, and I pass them on. But he had all these sayings, and one of our favorites, all the guys in here know, the 6 or 8 guys who played for him, is be where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, get done what needs to get done while you're there. And I know that he's definitely where he's supposed to be right now, albeit sooner than any of us really would have wanted. And I know he's getting some things done while he's there. Thank you.
Bring this down to a civil level. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. We come now to a stage in the program where we're going to give anyone in the audience who would like to share a story, an experience with Ken. We'll give you that opportunity now. I think what I should do is ask if Mrs. Miller would please stand and let everybody see you. There she is. She promoted a lot of good causes in this community while she lived here. Do you still have that bike? Still pedal that bike? Good for you. Anyone? Father?
Okay. I'm Father Tony Deasy, and I was the privilege of being the escort for Maureen for the football games. And anyways, we used to get together once in a while at our place, and anyways, then when it came down to the sportsman dinner, or the Plaza of Honor. And so I was so surprised because he invited me to come to the Plaza of Honor. And it just, I was so surprised with that he would have asked me to come to him, to come to the Plaza of Honor. And then when it came down to him speaking, because he was asked to speak, and then he started saying how welcoming that Father Tony had been when he came into the parish. And that just blew me away, kind of, because that was a kind of a natural thing that I thought people should do. And anyways, and then he went on praising me to the embarrassment. I said afterwards, in fact, Maureen, you remember that. I says, I felt so embarrassed because I thought, well, who am I? I mean, I didn't have very much to say. And anyways, so, yeah. So anyways, I just wanted to tell that story because it really had an impact in terms of my own life. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Trudy Lehman, and we had the fortune of having Ken and Maureen move in across the street from us when he came to work in Saskatchewan. And we had some wonderful times, some quite funny times, and Grey Cup time was awesome because Maureen said, I might be able to get the cup to ring over. And she did. She came out with the cup, and then she was at someplace else with it another evening. And I looked down the street, and here's Maureen coming back with the cup again. And it was so awesome. We took some pictures, and my son came over, and he just was really impressed. And we've been friends since, and I was fortunate enough to have a visit with Maureen yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Trudy. Anyone else? All right, fine, you go ahead. Got an architect up next.
Hi, my name is Harry Jedlick. I'm just going to tell you a little story about my wife and how they met, or how she met Ken Miller. Virginia got a scholarship to Dickinson State University. How she did it, I don't know, but she got this music scholarship and very quickly had to get things together and drive down to Dickinson for this sort of first meeting with the staffing. But she was a farm girl, and Dickinson is not a city, a huge place, but certainly it was different than coming from Windsor, Saskatchewan. She got homesick. Apparently she was in the cafeteria and started crying. And Ken Miller came up and says, what's your name? She says, Virginia, I'm from Saskatchewan. And he pronounced it, he tried to. He says, it looks like you need a friend. He says, and I'm your friend. And that cheered her up, and she remembered that story. And that's how they met in 1963, I think it was. And, that was history. But when we moved to Regina, suddenly, she says, that coach's name, that sounds familiar, I met this guy in Dickinson. Well, I said, that wouldn't happen. I mean, it's just too much of a coincidence. It wasn't. It was Coach Miller, and that's how we got together again, to see him and chat with him and enjoy his company and enjoy the story about Sisyphus. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. A new and very important means of missionary work in the church are these signs that you find in the front lawn, and they light up at night. I thought I'd bring along a couple of these that I've copied. One read this way: pretend it's Easter, come to church next Sunday. Being Christian means not hating. We know it makes football season hard. God didn't create anything without a purpose, but mosquitoes come close. Jeremy O'Day, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. I've heard a lot of conversations with my former teammates about Coach Miller, about him being a father figure. For me, he was, I considered him a grandfather figure for myself. I think maybe some of the reason for that is there was a lot of times when I was growing up where I didn't really agree with what my dad was telling me. So I was always, I wasn't sure. It took me a long time before I realized my dad was actually giving me good advice. But with Coach Miller, I always realized that he was giving you good advice all the time. So for me, he felt like a grandfather figure. Plus, when you talk to Coach Miller, he had that pause when you talk to him, and it scared the crap out of you half the time as a player. The players that talk to him know what I'm talking about. He would always be very thoughtful in his responses, and it would always scare us as players, saying we didn't know what was going to come out of his mouth, but it was just him processing and thinking, and he was always very thoughtful with that. Just wanted to share a story from me personally with Coach Miller. Mike pointed out kind of the priorities that were in his life, and this kind of speaks to that with Coach Miller. So it was, I guess, Father was nice enough to bring up the 2009 Grey Cup in the other room there. We appreciate that, and so I want to tell a story about that game. So obviously, I think everyone's aware of the outcome of the game, but I remember very clearly Coach Miller talking to us after that game, and Coach Miller was very honest. And it was the first time I heard a coach, basically admit that you're never going to get over this game, in your life. And he basically said, it's not going to get better tomorrow. It's not going to be better in a week. It's not going to be over in a month. He said, but over time, we'll start to heal from the game. And he was right. He was right. I don't think that, I wish he would have told us that every year during the Grey Cup, it's the number one Grey Cup game ever played, and we get to relive it every single year. I would have hoped that he would have told us that, but it did get better over time. But in particular, after that game, I remember myself standing in the locker room for a long period of time and staying in my equipment, and finally realized that my family was outside and that they were, waiting for me. And I was sitting in the locker room, and I don't think there was anyone left in the locker room. I realized, I better go out and see my family. They're waiting for me. They've been here and they just saw this game. And so I walked out, and there's no one left. All the taxis are gone, all the fans are gone, and they're in the middle of the stadium just waiting for me. And, no one else's families are there. Everyone had gone back to their hotels. And I remember kind of dawning on me, like, what am I going to do with my family? I have no idea how they're going to get back to the hotel. It's a long walk. My parents are here, my friends are here. And I remember Coach Miller just walked up to me and he told me, bring your family on the bus. And so, the point is that Coach Miller always cared about us. He cared about our families. He was, the lessons that we learned a lot on the football field, but we learned even more about being men, about taking care of each other. I thought it was pretty noble that someone had mentioned that Coach Miller never pointed a finger after the game, and I can tell you that none of the players in the locker room pointed a finger as well. And for the longest time, a lot of people were wondering what happened in the game, and because of the leader that we had in the locker room, we all kept ourselves to those standards. So he taught us a lot of values, a lot of things that we carry over in our lives. Just a couple quick ones here before I stop. Brenda, I hope you don't you forgive me for sharing this, but just a little bit of a laughter with this. Brenda, Jim Hobson's wife, is nice enough to be here tonight, and over the last number of months, we've been exchanging messages, and Brenda sends words of encouragements to myself. She has been slowing it down. I think she's maybe a little bit mad over the last couple weeks, but she's been sending me those messages, and I certainly appreciate those after the games. After Coach Miller had passed, and we know that that Jim has passed recently as well, she sent me a note, and it was after a tough game, and we've had our share of those in the last couple of weeks. But she said that she felt grateful, I think that was the word, that George and Jim and now Coach Miller could go into the command center and straighten them out. Right? Yeah, she did. Yeah. So we had a little bit of a laugh there. And then before I go, I think this is probably the appropriate place to do it. I'd be not doing our team any service if I didn't bring it up while we were here. Obviously, we've had a lot of close games lately. We've been very close to winning games and putting ourselves in a position to make a run in the playoffs here. So I understand there's a lot of people in here that are in good withstanding with the man upstairs. So if you could maybe give us a little bit extra, we certainly would appreciate it. So thanks so much. Maureen, thanks for sharing Coach Miller with us. And Coach, we miss you. We appreciate all the lessons that you taught us, and we miss you.
Mr. Vice President, thank you very much. You have one Grey Cup that lingers. For those of us who have been around for a little while, how'd you like to try 1976? Or how about 1972? Never forget those. Your Grace?
Yeah, that 1976 disaster of Tony Gabriel. So anyway, following on the 2009, so I was working in Rome and I came back in 2009, and I'd heard about that Coach Miller and Maureen were in Christ the King Parish, and that they'd become friends with Father Tony, and that he would get together with Coach and Mrs. Miller and some of the clergy. I thought, I can't wait to get back. And so as it is, they had a gathering scheduled a few days after the Grey Cup in 2009. And so my first year back after 7 years away, and it was just, it was a special season. You know, I mean, there was such a beautiful spirit among the players, and you could see the interaction. And then the 13th man happened, and I couldn't go to sleep that night. I was like half of the province, lying awake. And finally I thought, you know, it just can't end on a sour note after such a phenomenal season with such great teamwork. And so I got up and I wrote a letter to the mayor listing 10 reasons why the city of Regina should hold a parade for the Riders, even if they lost, because they were such a phenomenal team. And the mayor never answered the letter. But a few days later, when we were together and I got to meet Coach and Maureen, I said, I want to give you this so you read it sometime. But he read it right then and there, all 2 pages, all 10 reasons, several of which were about him. And we became friends that day. So it was a wonderful thing that happened also in the Catholic community, because Ken and Maureen were so integrated and really drew us in, who had been bleeding green our whole lives. Suddenly, Father Tony said, well, it was natural, but I mean, it wasn't just natural, it was a thrill that the coach of the Riders was coming to your parish, you know? So anyway, Maureen, it really means so much to us that you wanted to come back to Regina to have this memorial celebration. So thank you.
Is there anyone else? Anyone else? Well, thank you again. I think there are a few cookies left and some liquid, and you may want to visit with some of the folks here as well. Thank you very much again for coming. I'm most pleased that I was asked to be here.